In the end, Canon did not regain consciousness. Even though Dr. Nanjo and the rest did all they could to heal him, of course there was very little that they could do on an island like this without medical supplies or proper facilities. Let's quickly check that. Canon found the boiler room with a weapon resembling an ice pick sticking out of his chest. How presumptuous of lowly furniture like that. Okay, I've had a had a bit of a think about this, and so the murder of Eva and Hideyoshi. It's a locked room. Do I have the graph? No, I don't. So the thing blocking them from being a locked room murder is the chain on the door. While we can assume that they got in perfectly fine, getting out is the hard bit. We've got now 65 minutes for which they could have been killed, and it doesn't really help us. But there's two things it can be. A, let's assume it's an imperfect locked room, and the killer could have gotten out somehow. I think the main way they do that is using some hook to put the chain on while outside the door, 'cause they mentioned a 10 centimeter gap, but I don't know if that would be possible or not. So if it's an imperfect lock, they got in easily and used the hook, whatever, to get out through the door. When after Kanon and Genji showed up at the door, painted the symbol off, ran to the boiler room and killed Kanon. While this is all fine, the actual putting the chain back is a bit dubious, so let's assume it is a perfect locked room and there's no way we could get out. This means that the killer would have to be inside the room, similar to how Kinzo was inside of his room, according to Battler when he said that. So, because of this, someone on the outside, that means the killer was both inside the room to kill Eva and Hideyoshi, but also outside to put the symbol on the door before they unlocked it with the wire cutters. Which means there has to be two killers. And the second killer who is on the outside must be the one we saw in the basement. One other thing is where the knife was put in everyone. The important one being Kanon, who had his chest stabbed. Now, the weapon was described as the demon ice pick or whatever, and it's not a practical weapon to stab, especially not in someone's forehead like they did with everyone else. And one of the problems is that you'd have to be quite high up to be able to do that, or be quite tall. Now, because I mentioned that there has to be two killers, we don't have 19th person, we have a 20th person as well. And because it's not a 19th person anyway, that means that the 19th and 20th people must be people already who are currently alive. But everyone had an alibi. Jessica, George, Natsuri, Battler, and Maria were all in the parlor, while Kumasawa, Kanon, Genji, and Nanjo were all in the kitchen. However, the whole body swap theory states that Goda, Rosa, and Rudolph could be alive, but not really Goda because he was the swap out for Natsuri, which makes me think that our killers are Rudolph and even Rosa or Kiri. Rudolph will be inside the room to kill Eva and Hideyoshi, and Rosa or Kiri will be inside the basement to stab Kanon, and it was sort of a panic because, well, Kanon would very likely survive if we didn't pull the knife out of his chest, because that's how this works. And so that means Rosa or Kiri is the one who put the magic circle on the door. Also, it explains why Rudolph randomly mentioned he knows he's going to die. If he's the one to fake his own death, he'd of course know it's going to happen. Could be... I don't know which out of Rosa or Kiri will be the other one. I'm leaning more to Rosa because Kiri was also told that Rudolph was going to die. But that could just be another deception. Anyway, with that bonkers theory out of the way, let's move on. Also, Kumasawa could have killed Kanon. I'm saying the narrator can lie. However, Cannon was the only human ever to confront the culprit. If only he could give us some kind of clue. However, at the time they carried Cannon away, it was already too late.
申し訳ありません。あのような重傷を設備のないところではどうしようも。
いえ、無理もないことです。最善を尽くしてくださり、ありがとうございました。
Dr. Nanjo's shirt had been sprayed by a violent spurt of blood, so it was easy to imagine the devotion which he had tried to save Cannon's life up until the last second. Jessica was crouched in the corridor, crying softly. She had probably been taking care of Cannon until the moment of his death. George tried to approach her with words of comfort, but Jessica pushed him away. He stopped trying to force her to talk and left her alone.
私がカノンさんを一人で行かせなければ。
気に病むことはない。仮に一緒だったら熊沢も襲われていたかもしれん。それに愚かにも先走ったゆえの自業自得だ。
そんな言い方ってねえぜ。カノン君は犯人の姿を見つけて勇敢に立ち向かったんだ。熊沢さんも一緒だったら犯人は躊躇して逃げることを選んだかもしれない。
Emotion-filled words that I never thought I'd hear coming from Jessica's mouth tumbled out. Kumasawa, looking truly sorry, could do nothing but hang her head.
ジェシカ、今は言葉をかけるべきじゃない。僕だって。そしてバトラ君もだろう。もう何が何だかわからなくて心が張り裂けそうだよ。
There were tears in George's eyes again. Seeing Jessica break down crying probably brought back the pain of losing his parents. I'd done all my crying all at once, so I didn't feel like crying anymore. However, I understood how great of a pain their heart was.
大丈夫だよ、ジェシカ。カノンにだってまたすぐ会えるよ。
よしてくれよ。そういう慰めはいらねえぜ。
ベアトリーチェは死者も失った愛すらも蘇らせる。だからきっとすぐに会えるよ。そしてきっとみんなで穏やかに過ごせるから。
カノン君を殺したのがマリアに昨日手紙を渡したっていうベアトリーチェなのか。そいつはどこにいるんだよ。どこに隠れてるんだよ。私が見つけて引き裂いてやる。言えよ。知ってるんだろ犯人の正体を。お前は何を知っていて何を隠してるんだ。話しやがれ。
お嬢様、おやめください。
ベアトリーチェはいる。
畜生、源氏さん話せよ。マリアが犯人を知ってる。しかもそいつは知ってて隠してるんだ。そして俺たちの内情を伝えて殺しの手引きをしてるに違いないんだぜ。
ジェシカ、静かにしなさい。
Jessica grabbed at Maria. Again she tried to stop her, but Jessica could not be calmed. The next thing I heard was the sound of Art Natsui slapping Jessica's face. After that, only Jessica's soulful sobbing voice resounded throughout the hall.
マリアちゃん、僕は君が断じて犯人ではないことを知っている。君はいつも僕たちと一緒にいたし、犯人なんかと通じている時間はなかった。だから聞かせてほしい。君に昨日手紙を渡したベアトリーチェとは誰なんだい？
Although those words seemed kind, they all clearly showed that George still had some remaining doubts about Maria. He didn't actually grab at her, however, he felt the exact same way Jessica did.
兄貴、同じことは俺もさっき聞いたぜ。返事は同じさ。
マリアちゃんの口から聞きたい。ベアトリーチェとは誰なんだい？
言ってもどうせ知 信じない。
それはどういう意味だい？ひょっとして僕らのよく知る人物が犯人で、君は何かの事情からそれをかばうために黙っているというのかい？君はあの手紙を誰にもらったんだい？
ベアトリーチェにもらったんだよ。何度だって言う。手紙はベアトリーチェにもらった。ジョージお兄ちゃんがベアトリーチェを信じないのは殴れる相手じゃないから？ジョージお兄ちゃんはやるせない気持ちを暴力に変えて誰かにぶつけたいと思っている。だから殴れる相手が人間じゃなきゃ収まりがつかない。だからそんなジョージお兄ちゃんには真実を話しても受け入れられない。だから言っても無駄。信じない。でもマリアは何度も言うよ。真実だから言うよ。ベアトリーチェはね、いるの。黄金鏡の扉はもうすぐ開かれるよ。マリアはそこに行くの。ベアトリーチェが約束してくれたの。その世界ではママも優しくてパパも一緒で優しいの。マリアは早くそこへ行きたいの。みんなはベアトリーチェのことを恐れている。そしてそれは無理もないことだけど。なら安心して。ベアトリーチェは言ってたよ。台風が去るまでに全てを終わらせるからって。
饒舌なマリアも嫌いじゃねえが、とりあえずはそのくらいにしとけ。魔女はいるいる言ってたお前にとってさぞや現状は愉快だろうが、とりあえずそいつはお前だけで噛み締めとけ。他人にまで押し付けるんじゃねえ。
おお。
こいつ前から気持ち悪いやつだとは思ってたけど、おかしいぜ。どっかおかしいぜ。バトラは思わねえのかよ。ケンジさんは、熊沢さんは、母さんはどうだよ。マリアは犯人の正体を知ってて隠してる。確かに直接手を下してるわけじゃないかもしれない。でも間違いなく犯人の一味だぜ。そうさ、スパイさ。私たちと一緒になんかいさせられないぜ。
マリアちゃん、不謹慎な話を慎むべき時もあることを知りなさい。これ以上混乱に油を注ぐような真似が過ぎれば。
Aunt Natsui glared at Mario with frightening eyes. Mario was used to Aunt Rose's loud style of scolding, but she was apparently hadn't built up a resistance to Aunt Natsui's quiet sort of scolding. She shrugged and kept her mouth shut. A desolate feeling filled the room. I felt as though things would just get more complicated as everyone spoke. How many people have already died? 6 people in Dad's group. After that, both Aunt Eva and Uncle Yoshi, Canon, and Grandfather. There was a whole 18 people on this island supposedly, and 10 of those people had been killed. That's more than half of us. And right now, with absolutely no proof, the remaining 8 people will be safe.
とにかく今は仲違いをしている時ではありません。犯人が神出鬼没に屋敷内を出入りしていることが間違いなくなった今、私たちは明日まで身を守ることだけに専念しなくてはなりません。
夏日おばさんに極めて同感だぜ。犯人探しは今夜ゆっくりできるさ。今はどこで籠城するかを考えた方がいい。
As I said, I pointed the clock to everyone. It was already 8 at night. We had been receiving shocks over and over since the early morning, and our bodies and minds were completely tired out. There's still a long, long time until tomorrow. We need to find some place to barricade ourselves so we could rest our bodies and even the smallest amount of relief.
私も同感ですな。私も含め、もうみんな体も心も限界まで打ちのめされています。
今からそれを考えた方が賢明でしょうな。
そういうこった。敵はマスターキーに準ずるものを持っている公算が高い。
シャノンやカノン君、ゴーダさんはマスターキーを持ってましたか？
はい。勤務時間中だったなら身につけていたはずです。
現場をいじらない方がいいってんでそこまでは調べなかったろうが、誰かの鍵が奪われている可能性は否定できねえな。
そもそも犯人はバラ庭園倉庫のシャッターを開けるために一度使用人室を訪れている可能性があります。そこでマスターキーをすでに入手していると考えて間違いないでしょう。
There are many servants serving Ushiyama family. Because of that, there were several master keys. Furthermore, every time one employee started or finished working, the keys were passed between servants, and we had to acknowledge that this had a probably gotten a bit sloppy at times in the past.
仮に殺された使用人の誰かのポケットからその鍵でも開けられない安全な場所はあるのか？
私たちはお仕事の都合上、すべてのお部屋の鍵を預かっております。お屋敷もゲストハウスもすべてです。
つまり私たちはどこへ立てこもって鍵をかけようと上等だぜ。鍵なんかいるもんか。来るなら来やがれってんだ。返り討ちにしてやるぜ。
敵は正面から来ないよ。最初の6人はともかく母さんたちやカノン君、そしておじい様の霊を見る限り、敵は孤立した人間だけを狙ってる。一部屋に固まっている僕たちのところへ堂々と乗り込んで来られるほどの力はないんだよ。
そうだな、兄貴の言う通りだ。ひょっとするとおばさんのライフル銃が抑止効果として成立してるのかもしれないぜ。
なら良いのですが。
マリア、言いたいことがあるんだろうが、そいつは飲み込んでしばらく黙ってろ。
Mario probably wanted to say something about how witches weren't afraid of things like guns, but if you say it aloud, the atmosphere around here would have start to get pretty edgy. I noticed and decided to put a stop to it.
よろしいでしょうか。一箇所だけ使用人の鍵束でも入れない場所が。
それはどこです？
はい、親方様の書斎です。
私は反対だぜ。じい様の気持ち悪い部屋になんか入りたくない。
あの部屋に入れる鍵は何本あるんですか
？2本です。1本は常に私が、もう1本は親方様がお持ちでしたが、先ほどボイラー室の遺体からこれを。
Genji took out a handkerchief out of his pocket, opened it, showing us the burnt and filthy study key. Then he showed it alongside his own key, which he had once lent to Natsui.
本来なら警察のために鍵も残すべきだったのですが、親方様より書斎の留守は必ず守るようにと仰せつけられておりましたもので、私が。
なるほど。ということは金蔵さんの書斎は唯一の安全地帯というわけですな。
そういうことになりますね。あの怪しげな匂いの部屋に一晩も立てこもるなど考えたくもありませんが、あの部屋が一番安全であることを今は認めなければならないようです。
その安全な部屋に閉じこもってたじい様を犯人は連れ出して殺してる。絶対安全とは言い切れねえけどな。
バトラ君の説のおじい様がうまくレシートをやり過ごして自分の意思で部屋を出たと考えるなら、籠城の価値はあるかもしれない。
へえ、楽観的すぎだぜ兄貴。
However, at the same time, I thought he brought up a pretty interesting point. After all, this gives us a chance to question the enemy, the witch herself, about how the sealed door had been opened. If we assume the culprits used some technique to kidnap Grandfather from his study, they'd have to show us the same trick again if they want to assault us in the study. And that'd give us a chance to make the culprit prove how they did it right before our eyes. She's really a witch. We'll be forcing her to use her little magic trick to open the door right in front of us. But that's probably impossible. If you spin the chessboard around, it's obvious the culprit is acting in a way that will make us think they're a witch. If she really is a witch, all she's got to do is appear in front of us and wow us with a colourful display of magic. Since she's avoided doing that, everything must be a work of a fake witch who wants us to think she's real. Furthermore, the culprit used a technique other than magic to defeat the closed room couldn't... The culprit who used a technique other than magic to defeat the closed room couldn't open the door in front of our, before our eyes.
じいさんの部屋ってのは8人で押しかけても大丈夫なくらいの広さなんすか？
はい。ベッドにソファー、毛布類もありますので、贅沢を言わなければ十分に夜を越すことができます。流しにご浮上、冷蔵庫に酒棚もあります。
ひゅー、そいつはすげえぜ。しかしおかしなもんだな。自分の家の中にさらに自分の家を作ったってのか？島を丸ごと買って自分の夢を全て実現しきったじい様の最後の家にしちゃ随分手狭なんだな。
そうですね。いつの頃からかお父様にとっては屋敷内ですら心を許せる場所ではなくなってしまったのでしょう。
そこに引きこもっていたのを私たちは嘲笑い、そして今度は私たちがそこに立てこもろうってわけだ。
Jessica spat the words out.
ジェシカちゃんは立てこもるより犯人を探しに行きたいという感じだね。
もちろんこっちから探しに行って見つけられるなんて思っちゃいないぜ。結局は待つしかない。ならどこで待ったって同じだろ。逃げも隠れもしない。客までテレビでも見ながらのんびり現れるのを待とうじゃねえかよ、ベアトリーチェ様をよ。
現れなければ現れないで十分です。犯人を暴くのは私たちである必要がないからです。
正論ですな。警察が来るまで危険を冒すべきではありません。
ありがとう南條先生。私はお父様の書斎に移るべきだと思います。確かにお父様が連れ出された可能性があり、絶対の安全が保証されているわけではない。しかしバトラ君の推理のお父様が何らかの方法で自ら書斎を出て外で襲われた可能性も否定できません。
A while back I proposed that strange theory as a stopgap measure, but just as Aunt Eva said, even though the trick would be possible, I couldn't explain that motive could have made Grandfather sneak out of his own study in such a troublesome way. Plus, Grandfather couldn't even have used that trick unless he knew the receipt was wedged in the door. Aunt Eva hadn't pointed out that last part, but it's clear how absurd that theory was. So she didn't... So does that mean the sealed door formed a closed room just as Eva claimed? It's an undeniable fact that Aunt Netsui was the culprit. If Aunt Eva was here now, she'd probably make that claim openly and blow my strange theory away. But anyway, I had to admit that a room with a bed and a toilet and that all 8 people could be shut in, with only 2 keys, both of which we gathered here, had to be the safest place in the mansion right now. At the very least, I figured this would be better than staying shut up in the parlour and hoping nothing would go wrong. But wait, have we possibly been safe only because we've been shut up in the parlour? What if leaving that room and moving to an unexplored location is actually more dangerous? Ah, it's useless, useless, useless. My flimsy head is about to break out in a fever. If I keep spinning the chessboard around, right and wrong will keep switching places over and over, and I won't be able to believe anything. Which seems like the culprit is one of the 18, but what I want to believe in Beatrice. I want to start believing in Beatrice. I want to start finding the culprit amid the 18. If it keeps spinning around forever, in the end my thoughts won't have taken one step from where they started. How far back in the past was that Kiri taught me about the chessboard thinking? That concept of examining the situation by spinning it around and thinking from the enemy side? I seem to remember being so interested by it back then. I used to guide all my thinking. By the way, Kiri was Dad's co-worker back then. I never dreamed that she'd someday be added to our family. Didn't Kiri tell me something once? I get the feeling she once said that while this chessboard thinking is one way to look at all things, it certainly wasn't all powerful, and I couldn't be good to rely on it too much.
チェス盤思考ってのはね、昔本で読んだゲーム理論というものを私なりに解釈したものよ。とても面白い学問だから、バトラ君も大学に入ったら挑戦してみるといいわよ。
ぜひやってみたいっす。それを勉強してチェス盤思考をもっと鍛えたら、どんな相手の手の内も読めるみたいで楽しいじゃないっすか。
でもね、盲信しちゃダメよ。ゲーム理論は非常に奥深く複雑な学問なの。チェス盤思考はその上辺だけを私なりに解釈した考え方に過ぎない。バトラ君が想像するほどに相手の手の内を読み切るには相当の勉強が必要よ。しかもチェス盤理論は応用の利く便利なものではあっても完璧ではない。便利ではあっても弱点が多い。
弱点？
ええ、チェス盤思考の基礎はゲーム理論。ゲーム理論は突き詰めると数学に行き着くの。数学の弱点は何か知ってる？ノイズよ。
In math, when you write 1 plus 1 equals 2, that process will be always result in 1 plus 1 equals 2 no matter how many billion years pass, nothing more, nothing less. That's because there's absolutely no noise mixed in. But, for example, unlike math, the Japanese language has noise mixed in. Kanji are a good example. Old kanji and new kanji are slightly different, which represents an introduction of noise created by the change between time periods. Isn't history the same? There are dozens of policies that seem foolish in the modern era, but were meaningful at some point in the past. Because the rules of chess are fixed, when a pair of experts are discussing one particular layout, it's a possibility they could reach the same conclusions whether they are from 100 years in the past or 100 years in the future. However, if the rules of chess have gone through massive changes over time, it's possible that a discussion about the same layout would have changed as well.
その通り。人の世の事象は本来ノイズだらけなのよ。人の感情だってそうでしょ？全く同じことが起こったからといって人は必ず決められた反応を示すとは限らない。それを数学の理論で当てはめ相手の行動を読もうとする時点ですでに理論には弱点と限界があることを知らなければならない。手っ取り早く言うとチェス盤思考はノイズや気まぐれ、そして誤解、認識ミスに非常に弱いの。
That's right. Kiri definitely said that. Chess has always been a game that boils down where both sides play the same rules and fight the same conditions of victory. That's why it's possible for both sides to predict the other's moves. It's possible to read your opponent because you can always suppose they'll make the best move they can find. But what if your opponent is fickle and a bit tired, and makes a move that can hardly be called the best? Or what if the game actually has a special rule, some unknown thing that only the enemy knows about and can use? In fact, what if the opponent actually has some goal other than victory? Think from your enemy's perspective. That's the basis of chessboard thinking, which means if you misread your enemy, the answer you draw from the process is complete rubbish, useless. So far, I've used chessboard theory to get several vague bits of information about the culprit hiding behind this case, or so I think. However, I don't know anything about the culprit. Am I just playing around a labyrinth of thought? If Kiri were here at a time like this, she'd probably be able to notice something with her much, much sharper thinking ability. Until the very last moment, Jessica resisted moving into her grandfather's study, but in the end, Natsui persisted and we were able to move there. Okay, side thing. I've been, instead of looking at the opponent's perspective, because I'm bad at that, I've mostly been currently trying to prove that it is possible for something to happen, and that nobody else could have done it. Which is a bit difficult, especially in the first murder, because everyone could have done it, and there's no solid proof that anyone is exempt except, like, maybe Mario, and maybe Battler. But in the current theory of it being Rudolph and either Kiri or Rosa, because everyone else has an alibi, and there has to be two unless the Hook theory is real, and but at least one of the killer has to be someone who we think a 19th person, unless if it's Kumasawa. It just keeps on going on like that, except if it isn't. Everyone was completely wrapped up in paranoia by now. Kumasawa had prepared dinner at one point, but during the time we were discovering the death of George's parents, both the kitchen and parlour had been left empty. Someone suggested the food might have been poisoned while we were gone. Because of that, we were unable to even touch the food that Kumasawa had taken the trouble to make for us. The manner in which the first pics were killed were unknown, but it certainly could have been poison. Certainly, that would even allow a single person to carry out the murder of 6 large adults. Furthermore, this idea made it easy to imagine there being only a single culprit, one who'd be afraid of Aunt Natsui's rifle. And this was very good for our emotional stability. But fatigue and hunger were harsher than we'd imagined. Then Kumasawa made a proposal, and we all went together to the kitchen. There we gathered some canned food and other things we'd be hard to poison and take with us. All of Kumasawa's efforts were toward us with just a little dinner on the savage day. He regrettably came to nothing. The food piled up on the surfing cart looked just a little sad. We all started climbing the stairs. Aunt Natsui, who was in the lead, warily stared into the darkness, while with both eyes in the barrel of the gun. Once again we dragged ourselves up to the 3rd floor, just as Aunt Natsui had warned us of beforehand. There was a mixture of chemical smell and a sickly sweet aroma, a stench hanging in the air that felt like it was eating into our heads.
なるほど。こりゃ一晩もこもったら頭痛にでもなりそうな匂いだな。今更ながらじい様の書斎に反対したジェシカに賛成だぜ。
It felt like the stench was floating around from this magnificent door. It was the door to the forbidden study, which should defend against any who wished to enter. While Genji unlocked the door, Maria stared at the door and the doorknob with great interest.
すごいドア。
古くいかめしくて冗談の通じなさそうな、いかにもじい様の書斎にふさわしい扉だよな。
霊的な悪意を退ける力がとても強く込められている。多分ベアトリーチェはこの扉を開けられないね。
お？それどういうことだよ。
Maria pointed at the doorknob. Ah, the scorpion crest. Now a design like a magic circle arranged. A scorpion was inscribed here. The design, that's right. Isn't this just like the keychain charms Maria gave Jessica and me yesterday?
火星の5の魔法陣は強力な魔除け。しかもこの魔法陣は相当丹念に作られていて、力がよく満ちている。魔のものであるベアトリーチェにとって、この魔法陣はとても厄介だろうね。
それは心強いじゃねえか。この部屋ならベアトリーチェの魔手から逃げられるってことだろ。うちの魔女様は実に頼もしいぜ。
ならベアトリーチェはどうやって中のおじい様を？
バトラが推理した通りだよ。ベアトリーチェは中に入れない。でも彼女には魔法があるし、使い魔だっている。それらを使っておじい様が自分から書斎を出てくるように仕向けることはできるかも。
I mean, her literally standing outside and calling to him would have been enough.
ああ、漫画で読んだな。吸血鬼は十字架が怖くて近づけねえけど、使い魔たちはへっちゃらなんで、使い魔に襲わせるみたいなシーンを読んだことがあるぜ。
バトラたちに昨日あげたサソリのキーホルダーのようなお守りも、この火星の5の魔法陣だよ。込められている力は微々たるものだけど、この島を出るまでの間を守ってくれるだけなら十分だった。なくしちゃったそうだけどね。
サソリのキーホルダーのお守り。
ああ、昨日私が母さんに渡したお守りはマリアにもらったものだったんだよ。ドアノブにかけると魔除けになるとか言われて、私より母さんの方がいいかなってあの時は思って。
そうでしたか。ジェシカにしては変わったものを持っていると思っていました。
夏日おばさんがあれをドアノブに？
ええ、夕べそう聞き、寝る前に扉の内側のドアノブにかけました。
なら夏日おばさんはとても幸運だよ。そうだったなら夕べベアトリーチェは夏日おばさんに指一本触れられなかっただろうね。ベアトリーチェはさぞや悔しがったと思うよ。
Beatrice, annoyed, couldn't lay out one finger. Naturally thought back to the eerie scribble she'd seen that morning, as though someone had been tearing at the door of the outside of the door with blood-soaked hands, and gasped in surprise. Could it be? But this witch called herself Beatrice tried to enter the door through Natsui's own room, but the magic repelling charm had been hanging from the inside, so she couldn't break through the door. So she was annoyed, so she scratched at it.
よせよ、そういう話。魔女なんかいないぜ。いるのは犯人。それも私たちと同じ人間だ。それを確かめる必要があるってなら、八つ先にして血が赤いかも確認してやろうじゃねえか。くそよくもカノン君を。
Oh, they had a relationship. Oh, I'm stupid. Genji unlocked the door. 8 people entered Kenzo's study. Grandfather's study. I'd heard rumours about it beforehand, so I wasn't shocked. He had done nothing more than fortify it thoroughly through his occult hobbies. If Grandfather's hobby had been chasing after pop idols, the walls would have been buried beneath idol posters. Even if I couldn't understand it, I did realise this room wasn't a bundle of all his pastimes. Even so, I couldn't help but remain dumbfounded by the smell of this creepy medicine, and the sweet stench which seemed to melt my head. When the door was closed, it automatically made a clunk. I see this is the auto lock that's activated whenever the door is closed. And there are only 2 keys that could possibly open the door from the outside, both of which are in this room. In other words, it had become a closed room. The shutter, the seat, the chain, now the auto lock. The 4th door had the most magnificent lock yet, but it was doubtlessly a closed room. Just to make absolute sure this room's secure, we checked all over for ways in or out. Window was tightly locked. That should have been enough, but just in case, we tried knocking on all over the walls. After all, we had talked about there being a hidden door in this room, but we couldn't find anything suspicious. Grandfather's study was very large. Even though we called it study, it wasn't really a single room. We divided it into 4 basic sections. A study section for a bathroom section, a toilet, bedroom section, a toilet, bathroom section, and a section for cooking that had a sink. I see, the study really does have enough to live in. Now I see how Grandfather could live his whole life in this room without ever leaving. It seemed Grandfather wasn't in the habit of watching TV, because there was no television or even a radio in his room. We couldn't do anything to pass the time except listen to the sound of rain until tomorrow morning. Dr. Nanjo looked carefully at the chessboard that sat on the table and the sofa and muttered. It's apparently the partly finished chess match he'd been playing with Grandfather until yesterday. The black and white had the white pretty much cornered, and it looked like the checkmate would be reached in a few moves to the last part of the endgame. Even though checkmate had almost been reached, the endgame had been rushed, and in the end it was never completed.
金蔵さん、やはりこの勝負は決着がつきませんでしたな。
南條先生。
わしは長く金蔵さんの友人だったが、金蔵さんのことを知っているのは半分だけでしかなかった。金蔵さんにはいつも聡明な金蔵さんと何かの狂気にとらわれた金蔵さんの2人が同居していたように思う。わしは金蔵さんのことを何も理解してはおらんかった。
特にベアトリーチェ様のことになると人が変わったようでしたっけね。
In the direction of Kumasawa's upward gaze, a portrait of Beatrice could be seen. It wasn't massive like the one hanging bed for Saul, but small and made for this room. Grandpa probably spent every day of his life in his room and so much of his time talking to the witch in that portrait. Who was Beatrice to Grandfather in the first place? Right now, you couldn't just explain it away by saying it was a story made by the parents to frighten children from wandering into the forest. While eating the canned food we bought from the kitchen, we talked about who Beatrice was, whether the culprit was Beatrice herself or someone pretending to be her, whether or not they were a witch or a human, that was besides the point. The woman in this portrait was strongly related to the roots and background of this case. You couldn't talk about this case without talking about her.
そうだ、母さん、エヴァおばさんたちの部屋で犯人の手紙を拾ったんでしょ？
ええ、まだ開けていませんでしたね。開けてみましょう。
At Natsui took out a western envelope. Genji pulled a knife out of his pocket drawer in his study desk and handed it to her. While watching her open it, George grimaced slightly. After all, it was a letter left at the site of his parents had been murdered. There was a good chance its contents would say something unbearable to George. Aunt Natsui had always seemed to realise that, so she glanced over the contents first without reading it out loud. We were a little frightened that she might grimace after reading something shocking, but frowned unhappily.
内容は何と？
不愉快な一文があります。私たちを挑発するつもりなのでしょう。
Natsui, after deciding if the contents could be shown to the children, set it openly on the table. Everyone stared at it at the same time.
我が名をたたえよ。なんだよこれ。
Something's changed.
うせえぜ。
ベアトリーチェの勝ち名乗りみたいなものだろうね。くそ。
大方また怪しげな魔法陣でも出てくるのを期待してたんだろう。
魔法陣ではなかったけどね。想像は裏切られなかったよ。
どういう意味でしょう。自分の存在を誇示したいのでしょうか。
そう考えるのが妥当でしょう。この手紙で初めて私たちは昨夜の手紙の主が犯人であると理解できる。ここに書かれている内容よりも昨夜と同じ封筒でというところに意味があるものと思います。
封筒も風浪も間違いなく親方様が使われていたものです。
おお、もう私には何が何だか分かりませんよ。こんなことは後宮のお家にお仕えして以来初めてのことです。
昨日の手紙の言う通りならベアトリーチェは自称じい様の最古の腹心だ。じい様も常々そう口にしてたんですよね。
They spoke to Genji and Kumasawa, who nodded together.
ってことは、じい様の次に詳しいのは源氏さんと熊沢さんってことになる。話してくれないっすか。
私は長いことわざと耳にしなかった話です。ですがこの後に及んではそうも言っていられません。源氏、知っている限りを話しなさい。
Genji didn't answer. Did he remain silent despite his knowledge, or did he not know nothing at all? Still, I had a good guess. The ghost story of the witch Beatrice had long been defied among the servants, so he probably had been very close to grandfather and his occult hobbies. There's a good chance he'd been indoctrinated with even weirder things and had increasingly come to deify the witch. As grandfather's most trusted servant, who had sworn loyalty to him, he would be mostly influenced by the illusion of the witch that grandfather had created. So there was only one reason for Genji to remain silent. He could speak, but it definitely caused a backlash, so it was better to keep his mouth shut, and it wasn't like we'd believe him anyway. Something alongside those lines. A short while ago, Maria had been more than willing to speak bluntly and unrestrainedly, and that had earned her a scuffle with Jessica. It was natural for Genji to keep his silence.
お父様の愛人ですか。
His concubine. That could be possible. For auntie poor people, polygamy isn't only reviewed negatively from a moral perspective, it's also an unmaintainable financial situation. But isn't the case for the very rich. It's possible for them to have another love in addition to their real wife. We can't deny this possibility that grandfather had another woman in his life besides grandmother.
かもな。ばあ様は生きてた頃よく疑ってたらしいぜ。浮気相手がいるってな。俺はてっきりそれはじい様の想像の中の魔女のことを指してるんだとばかり思ってたんだが。
それなんとも面白い話になってきたぜ。源氏さんは俺に言ったよな。ベアトリーチェはこの屋敷ができる以前からじい様に仕えてたって。
お屋敷が竣工したのは昭和27年と聞いています。
ってことはベアトリーチェという人は30年以上も昔からおじい様と連れ添っていたということになるね。
その30年前の愛人、もしくはその縁者や隠し子が何かの恨みがあって何らかの復讐を企んだか。なるほど。洋館ミステリーっぽいありがちなストーリーになってきたじゃねえか。
汚らわしい話ですが一番納得できる筋書きです。どうですか、源氏。
おそらく親方様に恋愛の感情は終わりになられたでしょう。亡くなられた奥様より愛しておられたに違いありません。
ベアトリーチェってのは何者なんだよ。そして今はどうしてるんだ。
お屋敷ができるより前にお亡くなりになったと聞いています。
すでに死んでいる？
はい。親方様は大層深く悲しまれ、ベアトリーチェ様を蘇らせる方法として黒魔術に傾倒なさっていったのです。親方様はベアトリーチェ様を心の底から愛しておられたのです。このような狂気に駆り立てるほどに。
As Genji-san said this, he spread his arms, as though asking us to look at this room filled with signs of grandfather's madness. We were all at a loss for words. Normally black magic seemed like it'd just be creepy, and it isn't really hard to imagine why someone might be so enraptured by it. Since Kinzo was just an eccentric who had restored the Ushiyomaya family amidst his madness, nobody had tried to understand him. The only thing that on Grandfather's mind had been the loss of a beloved woman, and his inescapable sorrow. Earlier, this room had seemed creepy, but in an instant it had changed into something we could understand completely. The creepy books, the magic circles, the medicine, all of it. It all existed simply because he wanted to revive the face of a single woman who had left this world over 30 years ago.
一度だけ深く酔われた親方様にベアトリーチェ様のお話を聞かされたことがあります。詳しいことは忘れてしまいましたが、それはもう女の私が聞いて羨むような深い深い。
金蔵さんは後宮家の当主を継いだ時、当時まだ生き残っていた後宮家の長老たちの意向で亡くなった奥さんとの結婚を決められたのです。
つまり後宮家にとってと強制された。
さようです。金蔵さんはお家復興のためだけに当主に据えられ、全ての重責を背負わされたのです。そんな金蔵さんがどこでどういう経緯でベアトリーチェと知り合ったのかは分かりかねます。
それ以上語るのは無粋だな。
That was when Grandfather truly fell in love for the first time. Just how deep was his affection for her? It's easy to see just by looking around us. The room was covered with piles and piles of things having to do with black magic, and Grandfather spent every day shut in here, immersed in his research and isolated from the outside world, never regretting 1 minute of it. You couldn't help but recognize the depths of Grandfather's love for Beatrice.
私誤解してたよ、ケンジさん。
何をでしょうか。
私、使用人の人たちが魔女を問診するのはじい様の気持ち悪い黒魔術趣味に感化されてるからじゃないかってずっと違ったんだな。
By acting as though Beatrice's soul at least had been restored and existed inside the mansion, they might have hoped to soothe Grandfather's heart. With closed eyes and an expression of one remembering something from a distant past, Genji had broken his long silence. In making that confession, he probably felt like he was betraying his one and only master in the most serious way, even though that person was already dead. Beatrice has revived as a witch, and she is now in the mansion even now. Genji had said it, and believed it, had made people believe it, and would take that with him to his grave. This might have been the last service he could offer up to his master. The legend of a witch, the mysterious tale of Rokkenshima that was still whispered amongst the servants, its true nature was a sad lie. No, it was the act of kindness towards Grandfather, who had lost a person he loved to all outself.
私はお父様の前で魔女を否定する話を何度か口にした覚えがあります。今ならそれがどれだけお父様を傷つけていたかわかります。
今の僕にならわかるよ。シャノンを蘇らせる方法が黒魔術だというなら、僕は今すぐにもこの部屋の次の主となって研究を始めるよ。
兄貴。
Another tear dripped from George's eyes. Maybe his tears were infectious, but tears rose to Jessica's eyes too, and she sniffled.
ベアトリーチェは言っていたよ。もうじき蘇ることができる。会うことができるって。
Very soon the door to the Golden Land will be opened. In the promised land that glitters gold, the souls of the dead will be resurrected along with the love that has been lost. Then I will sleep in a world of peacefulness for all time.
そう言ったのか。マリアに手紙を渡したベアトリーチェは。
信じないよね。
ここにじい様がいたならきっと喜んだろうな。もうじきベアトリーチェが蘇ることにさぞや踊り上がって喜んだろうな。なら俺は信じたぜ。じい様が半生をかけて研究したことで蘇り、愛した女の魂が蘇ったと信じて寿命を全うできるって言うんなら。
バトラー、
一人の女性をずっと愛し続けた気持ちが周りにも伝わり真実となる。それを気遣いと呼べばそれまでだろうけれど、今の僕はあえてそれを魔法と呼んであげたいね。
気遣いじゃないよ。本当に魔法だよ。魔女だよ。やっぱり誰にもベアトリーチェの姿は見えないんだね。
Some time passed as we listened to the sound of the vein. We considered what kind of love and madness had been possessed the owner of this room spent half his life in here.
女の私から聞けば、お父様の純愛の気持ちも少しは理解したいところですが、それではお母様の立つ瀬がありません。
同感だぜ。浮気は浮気。綺麗事にされちゃかなわねえよな。
それもそうだな。ばあ様が気の毒になっちまうぜ。
それでベアトリーチェとおじい様の間に子供がいたなんて話はある？
The keyword Beatrice was hidden in every corner of this case, so it's natural to suspect some relative of hers.
いえ、そのような話は聞いたことがありません。
仮にいたとしたら最愛の人の忘れがたみとしてきっと全ての愛情を注ぎ込んだだろうね。それがなく黒魔術に没頭していったなら子供はいなかったと考えるべきなのかな。
そういえばこんな噂を聞いたことがあるぜ。知ってるだろ、じい様が福音の家っていう孤児院に莫大な援助をしてるって話。
よしなさい。それはお父様を冒涜する中傷に過ぎません。
教えてくれよ、夏日おばさん。隠し事はなしなのはおばさんもだと思うっすよ。
くだらない話です。お父様はその施設に莫大な援助をし、社会勉強の一環として当家の使用人雇用枠を開放していました。それをお父様に汚らわしい趣味があると吹聴する愚か者がいたというだけの話です。
一時期それが黒魔術の生贄にするためだみたいな噂になってさ。実際いつもこの部屋で怪しげな実験や儀式を繰り返してたわけで、私も半分は信じてたところがあったぜ。
その福音の家出身の使用人ってのは？
何人かいますが、親族会議中のシフトではシャノンとカノンの2人でした。
To resurrect Beatrice, he had brought in servants from an orphanage as human sacrifices.
確かにじい様が使用人として選ぶのはいつもシャノンやカノン君くらいの若い子ばかり。私だってじい様には妙な趣味があるに違いないって信じてたぜ。
ジェシカ、言葉を慎みなさい。
When on that series, gods how the atmosphere instantly went sour and everyone fell quiet. However, something was tugging at the back of my mind. Sacrifices, human sacrifices brought over from an orphanage. What is it? Frankly, words like sacrifices don't pop up often, and yet I've seen or heard that word recently. Some part of my memory is tugging at me. Hey, Beatrice, what do you know? I had arrived in front of the portrait of Beatrice. It wasn't as massive as one of the main entrance halls, but it was a portrait which had been drawn by some famous painter, was just as intimidating in its smaller size. Below it, just like against its hole, was the epitaph that supposedly hinted at the location of a hidden gold.
生贄だ。
なんだよバトラ、急に気持ち悪いこと言うなよ。
生贄を6人。
Both my eyes were as wide as plates. Everything's been predicted right here from the very beginning. Everyone crowded around, and the same expression of shock rose to all of our faces. That's right here in the epitaph. On the first twilight off of the six chosen by the Kia sacrifices.
間違いない。最初に死んだのは6人だ。そしてシャッターに書かれた魔法陣じゃねえ、ヘブライ語でも生贄を捧げると書いてあった。
おお、私は最初からそう言ってる。
That's right, Maria said it right at the start. Right when we found the six bodies, when Maria was in the parlour watching TV, she said it. Ooh, the culprit isn't human. It's just sacrifices chosen by the key.
これは黄金の隠し場所なんかじゃねえ。黒魔術か何かの復活の儀式の手順なんだ。確かこの碑文には大勢の死が必要になるはず。
確かにざっと読むだけでも 6+2+5 で13人は死ななくちゃならないことになってるぜ。
普段はこの島には何人いるんですか？
使用人のシフトにもよるでしょうが、お父様、夫に、私にジェシカ、そして使用人が 2,3 人。昨日今日は5人いてもらってますが、普段はそこまでいません。
ってことはだ、この儀式を実行しようとしたら普段じゃ生贄が足らないってわけだ。いや違うぜ。じいさまは福音の家から不気味な儀式の生贄にするために使用人を取ったという噂。
つまりなんだよ、生贄の人数を増やすために使用人を増やし、さらに人数が集まる年に一度の親族会議はこの儀式を執り行える年にたった一度唯一のタイミングだったってことじゃねえか。
When Jessica screamed this, Mario broke out from that creepy laugh, looking truly pleased.
人は運気を試すためにある種の確率に願掛けをすることがない？
Like throwing a sandal and saying that if it lands right side up, tomorrow will be sunny, or saying that tomorrow will be a good day if the coin lands heads up. There are many little superstitions like that. Sometimes when your luck is down and get bored, you will roll a dice and get 3 sixes. You want to believe it's a portent of some miracle. When flipping a sandal, you have at worst a 50% chance. Even if you get it right side up, it's not worth much. But if you carelessly roll 3 dice and they all come up 6, you might think that's a small miracle.
魔術にもそういう考えはあるんだよ。限りなくありえない出目を期待してひたすらに祈祷を続ける。そうして蓄えられた祈祷の念は奇跡の出目が現れた時、魔力をもって具現化される。おじいさまがしようとした魔術は多分そういうもの。
It only exists because people believe it exists.
鍵が無作為に選ぶ生贄の抽選。それに万が一自分が当たることがないように、この島に最も人が多くなる日を選んで儀式を実行した。
バカバカしい。これらが全て怪しげな魔法の儀式の過程で起こった事件だと言い出すのですか？
Natsui yelled. She couldn't quite quell the fear that a scorpion charm might be the only reason she was still alive. If I hadn't realised the charm from Jessica and hung it on my doorknob, I would have been killed and mixed it along with those 6. And the strangest part is, even though I hung the charm from beside my door, they couldn't get through the door. The culprit noticed the charm from the outside of the door and gave up trying to open it. A human couldn't have perceived that. The charm is meant to stop something that was not human, and done exactly that. Impossible, impossible, impossible.
だが夏井さん、確かに碑文の内容はその後をなぞっとる。
第二の晩に残されし者は寄り添う二人を引き裂け。これはエヴァ様たちのことを指しているのでしょうか。
悔しいけどそうだと判断せざるを得ない。そして母さんたちを殺した犯人は続く第三の晩の言葉を手紙に書き、その場に残したんだからね。
Wait, no, it's not even Hideyoshi who were that people. It was canon. Because they're both dead, so you can't say they're torn apart. But Canon and Jessica can certainly say that they were torn apart.
そうだな。第二の晩を実行し、第三の晩をその場に残した。第三の晩はまさにさっき夏代おばさんが読んだ通りだぜ。
On the third twilight, those who remain shall praise my noble name. Ah, if you read it that way, it just keeps on going, doesn't it? On the fourth twilight, gouge for head and kill. Gouge for head and kill. George's parents were killed by the demonic picks, gouged on their heads. But if they were the second twilight, someone else must have been gouged in the head.
じいさまだ。焼却炉の中で焼かれてたから、そっちに目が行っちまって気づかなかったが、じいさまも眉間に、いや、頭をえぐられてた。
じいさまが第四の晩の犠牲者。
All canons gouged for chest and kill.
じゃあカノン君は
第五の晩に胸をえぐりて殺せ。カノン君については犯人との突発的な遭遇による犯行だと思ってたけど、誰か一人をおびき出し胸を貫くことを初めから狙っていたんだ。
もし犯人がこれをなぞっているとしたなら、また3人が死ななければならないというのですか。
On the sixth twilight, gouge for stomach and kill. On the seventh twilight, gouge for knee and kill. On the eighth twilight, gouge for leg and kill.
確かにそう読み取れますけど
いや、そいつはどうかな。あと3人が死ねば第9の晩になる。見てみろよ。
On the ninth twilight, the witch shall arrive, and none shall be left alive.
私たちはベアトリーチェにみんな殺される。
わけがわかんねえ。結局何人いようが最後には全員死ぬってことじゃねえか。じいさまは何が目的だったんだ。この儀式じゃじいさま自身何をどうしたって生き残れねえじゃないか。
誰も生き残れなくていいんだよ。第10の晩には黄金鏡にたどり着く。
On the tenth twilight at your journey's end, you shall retain the power of the Golden Land's treasures, and for the last time, which shall praise the wise and bestow four treasures.
おじいさまは死を恐れてなんかいなかったんだよ。
So, our goal is to find the key and then die.
ほら、4つの宝の2番と3番を見てごらんよ。
And also force the other twilights to occur.
一つは全ての死者の魂を蘇らせ、一つは失った愛すらも蘇らせる。
So only the first part of the epitaph is
つまり
relevant.
おじい様は自分がこの儀式の途中で死んでしまってもやがては復活できると信じてた。
バカバカしいぜ。妄言だぜ。死んだらそれまでだろ。死者は生き返らない。人類が何千年もかけて追い求め、結局は未だに成し遂げられない奇跡だぜ。つまりこういうことだろ。死後の世界で再会できて蘇ることができるとか、そういう類だろ。
ジェシカの言い分通りだとするなら、老い先短いじい様が恋に狂っての自殺まがい、いや壮大な無理心中ってことなのか。
天智、その可能性は。 考えられる。
わかりません。親方様は時に1000年の未来を見越されるほどの聡明なお方です。しかし凡庸な私にはそれが狂気としか映らないこともあります。
それってイエスって意味だよな。熊沢さんはどうなんだよ。
私は何も知りません。知りませんとも。知っていたなら今日この島にいると思いますか？手病でも何でも使ってお休みしていますよ。
おじい様の長年の友人である南條先生のご意見は？
源氏さんに同じです。金蔵さんは凡人をはるかに超越した方だった。そこにある種の人間離れした力すらも感じることはありました。私にも金蔵さんが何を考えてこの碑文を残されたのかわからない。
一つだけ言えるのは、仮にこの筋書きを作ったのがお父様であっても実行。
確かに少なくともじい様とカノン君を襲った犯人は他にいる。しかもそいつはこの碑文通りまだ事件を続けようとしている。
僕たちが深く考えなかった最初の手紙、あれには何て書いてあっただろう。
We thought back to the recitation of the letter last night. Beatrice had proclaimed something inside it. She proclaimed that according to her contract with Kinzo, she would collect everything from Usha and my family as interest. But she had also revealed a special clause. If someone discovered the location of the gold grandfather had hidden, that right would be lost. When the letter was read, grandfather was still alive, but at that time it had already been sealed with wax by the head's ring, which meant grandfather had handed the ring over to Beatrice when he was still alive. If we take a straightforward approach, that means we should assume Beatrice is carrying out that strange contract with grandfather guaranteeing her that right. In other words, it's the same as saying grandfather knew and approved the contents of that letter. In other words, it's basically a joint message from Beatrice and grandfather telling us that Beatrice will start collecting interest if we don't solve the riddle. In other words, grandfather and Beatrice were demanding that we try and solve this riddle on the epitaph. And if we couldn't, they were saying that the massacre would be carried out according to the epitaph. What does that mean? What do they want? I don't have a clue what that means.
ほら、ベアトリーチェからまた手紙だよ。
なんだって？
Mario points to the one on top of the table where the canned food and everyone would be eating just now lay. A western envelope from Beatrice certainly was sitting there, but also what? Aunt Natsui let out a hysterical cry, looking between her and her hand on the table, because the envelope she was just opened was still grasped on her hand. Why is there still an envelope on the table?
なんだよ。どういうことだよ、マリア。
Okay, so one of the culprits must be in this room.
その封筒はどこから出てきたんだ。
And there's another one on the outside.
今見たら置いてあった。
私は何も知りませんよ。何も。
冗談じゃねえ。ここには俺たち8人しかいねえんだぞ。9人目がこっそり忍び込んでいたなんてこともあるわけがねえ。俺たちがちょいと肖像画の前に集まっていたわずかの隙しかないんだぞ。
全員下がりなさい。壁へ下がりなさい。
Aunt Natsu was pointing with a rifle at Genji and the others bellowing at them. Genji was overpowered, his face looking as if he didn't have a clue what was going on. Of course, I felt the same, but a few moments later I reached the same conclusion Aunt Natsui had. Till a few seconds ago there had been no letter on this table, and nobody entered this room, which meant someone among us placed it during the few seconds when everyone was looking away, preoccupied with the portrait.
バトラ君、この封筒を開けて中身を読んで。
I picked it up. it was still sealed with wax. Even wrapped thermal contents, I realised it was as yet unwrapped envelope, an unknown envelope. Without relying on a paper knife, I tore it open and pulled out the letter inside. The contents were as follows.
金蔵様の碑文の謎をお楽しみいただいているでしょうか。すでにご存知と思いますが、皆様方には時間が多くは残されてはおりません。どうか嵐が過ぎ去れば逃げ出すことができるという甘えをお捨てくださいませ。このゲームには私と皆様方のどちらが勝つかの結果しかない。時間切れは私の勝ちとなる。引き分けはありません。そこをどうか誤解なきようお願い申し上げます。
って内容だぜ。
この手紙を誰が置いたかは明白ではありません。ですが疑わしき人物を絞ることはできました。あなたたちです。
奥様。
That's not narrowing down the list of suspects.
それはあんまりにございます。
私は肖像画の前に行く直前、ここに缶詰を置きました。その時このような怪しげな手紙は決して置かれていなかったことを確認しています。そしてその時すでにジェシカとジョージ君、マトラ君は肖像画の前にいた。そして彼らはこの手紙が現れるまで肖像画の前を離れていない。つまりあなたたち4人の中にその手紙を置いた人物がいる。ベアトリーチェがいる。
おお、ベアトリーチェはマリアたちじゃない。ベアトリーチェはいるの。
Yeah, but I'm accomplices in this room.
お黙りなさい。あなたたちの中の一人が疑わしいのか全員が疑わしいのか分かりません。しかし確実にあなたたちの中に犯人が混じっている。
そうだぜ。19人目なんかいるわけがない。魔女なんかいるわけがないんだ。カノン君を殺したのだって。そうさ、熊沢さんなら説明できるよ。熊沢さんは本当はカノン君と一緒にボイラー室に入り殺したんだ。そして後から来たらもう倒れていたと嘘をついた。
誤解です、お嬢様。私がなぜそのようなことを。
母さんたちをどうやってあの密室で殺したのかは見当もつかない。でも母さんたちが殺された時、使用人の人たち以外の全員にはアリバイがあった。なかったのは使用人の人たちだけ。でも本当に疑ってもいいんだろうか。
確かにそれを言い出したら全ての件でアリバイはないが。
Should we really be so quick to make that judgment? But this time, in this room, in this place, in this moment, in this minimally small space of time, it was obvious. Only one of the four could have set the letter on our blind spot. We can't tell who put it there, but it's obvious one of the four did it.
夏井さん、どうか落ち着きなさい。今日一日いろいろなことがあった。心が参っているのはよくわかります。
南條先生をお疑い申し上げるのは非常に心苦しいです。ですがお父様の主治医として、唯一無二の親友として、長くお父様とベアトリーチェのことも知っているかもしれない。何かの古いしがらみを知っていて隠しているのではありませんか。
そんなはずはない。落ち着きなさい。
It was pitiful to watch Dr. Nanjo frantically pleading his innocence. It was probably a normal reaction that anyone would give if they were suspected. Kurosawa was the same. Ever since Jessica voiced her suspicions of Kurosawa murder in canon, Kurosawa had been totally flustered. That's why Genji's still calm appearance looked so bold. Aren't necessarily pointing the barrel of the gun.
ゲンジ、あなたはお父様の一番の部下です。ベアトリーチェとはあなたがお父様に見せた幻想で、あなたこそがその実行者だったのではないのですか。
そうお疑いいただけるのは奥様が私を 親方、このような場ではありますが、とても名誉なことだと存じま
Now it's not the time to flex, Genji.
す。しかし、この手紙を置いたのは私ではありません。
それを私が鵜呑みにできると思いますか。お前が首謀者に決まっています。あるいは熊沢も南條先生もその共犯かもしれない。マリアちゃんもです。
Not content just to suspect the adults, Aunt naturally pointed the gun relentlessly at Maria too. But Maria acted as though nothing had happened, or maybe she thought she would be fine even if she was shot.
マリアちゃん、今この場ではもう幼いから疑いの枠から外すという段階にない。だから誰もが昨夜からずっと持ってきた疑問をもう一度ぶつけ。昨日バラ庭園であなたに手紙を渡したベアトリーチェは誰です。
マリア、ごまかすんじゃねえぜ。この際はっきりさせろ。お前に手紙を渡したのは誰なんだよ。
だから何度も言ってるよ。ベアトリーチェだよ。1000年を生きる黄金の魔女なんだよ。姿を知りたければ後ろを振り返ればいい。ほら、そこにいるよ、ベアトリーチェが。
バカにしてんのかてめえ。
よせジェシカ、マリアもよせ。状況が分かってんのか。そんなこと言って何になるってんだ。無意味な挑発はよしやがるってんだ。
マリアには分かんないよ。バトラたちは誰が犯人ならいいの？自分たちの中に犯人がいると信じたくない時だけベアトリーチェを信じて、親しい人を殺された恨みを晴らしたい時だけ暴力をぶつけられる人間の犯人を信じたがってベアトリーチェを否定する。だから見えないんだよ。ベアトリーチェはいる。お前たちには見えない。
黙りなさい。あなたが犯人だと決めつけたくはありませんが、この状況を不愉快にさせて楽しんでいる利的行為者であることはもはや疑いの余地もありません。
ならどうするの？マリアを撃つ？別にいいよ。もうすぐ黄金鏡の扉が開かれる。そして全ての死者がよみがえる。今や死は恐れるべきことではないんだよ。
母さん、やっぱりこいつは怪しいよ。一緒になんかいられないよ。
でも夏日おばさん、どうか落ち着いて。マリアちゃんを撃つ理由は何もない。どうか冷静に。手紙は挑発するけど何も恐れることはない。犯人だって明日が怖いんだ。警察が怖いんだ。この島は今無秩序に支配されているけれど、それは台風で隔離されているからだけに過ぎない。台風が過ぎれば秩序が戻ってくる。だからおばさん、撃っちゃいけない。
なんでジョージ兄さんはそんなにも冷静なんだよ。この4人の中に犯人がいる。いや、あるいは4人が全員来るかもしれない。この中にエヴァおばさんたちを殺した犯人がいるかもしれないってのに、なんでそんなに冷静なんだよ。
僕だって犯人を見つけて殺してやりたい気持ちはあるさ。でもそれは単なる蛮行だ。僕は罪の裁きを秩序に任せる。だからどんなに疑わしくても引き金を引いてはいけないんだ。
ジョージの兄貴に同じだ。夏日おばさん、ここはちょいと冷静になろうぜ。とにかく撃つのはまずいぜ。こういう時はよ、頭を後ろに反らしてクールになるって3回唱えるといいらしいぜ。
はっきりさせておきます。魔女などいない。ここは六軒島で、ここは後宮家の本家屋敷です。後宮家代表、後宮夏日として宣言します。ここには魔女などいない。ベアトリーチェなど認めない。何を企もうとも娘たちには指一本触れさせない。それが母としての、当家代表としての務めです。
Those were final words of farewell that settled everything. To protect her daughter, Aunt Natsui would regard any suspicious person as an enemy. The only reason George and I were standing on this side was because by coincidence we had a clear alibi regarding the letter. If I hadn't approached her portrait, I'd also be on the other side of the gun barrel, treated like a criminal. But even though this part of me knew that, part of me was thinking that chasing all the suspicious people out of this room would finally guarantee our safety. Genji, Kumasawa, Dr. Nanjo, all of them were on our grandfather's side. Maybe you could say that once Maria started blindly believing in Beatrice, she was also on grandfather's side. That's right, they're all suspicious. But is it really okay? If we throw them out all the suspicious ones in this lawless way, will we still have a right to defy the lawlessness of a witch? Aunt Natsui didn't tell them to leave of her own words, but with wordless pressure she induced them to say it themselves. Because if Dr. Nanjo didn't say those words, this cold silence would continue forever.
落ち着きなさい、夏日さん。だが気持ちはよくわかる。わしだって今朝からの異常な事件続きで頭がどうかなってしまいそうだ。だからわしらを疑いたい気持ちもよくわかる。
もし本当に南條先生が無関係なら、私は無礼極まりないことをしているのだと思います。ですが、今だけは分かってください。
わかった。わしらは部屋を出ましょう。どうですかな、源氏さん。客間に戻ってチェスの続きといきませんかな。
それをお望みでしたらぜひ。
私は嫌ですよ。だってこの中に狼がいると分かってて部屋から追い出されてしまうんですよ。嫌ですよ、奥様。どうかお許しください。
It was obvious that Kumasawa was trying to say, if she was innocent, then being ejected into dangerous territory along with a culprit, in the current situation, urging her to leave this room along with suspects is almost exactly the same as letting her get killed. However, Kumasawa was really just suspicious for being the first one to discover that Kanon-kun had been murdered. At that time, everyone except Kumasawa had an alibi. Unless we could prove the existence of some contraption or the existence of some 19th person, Kumasawa was far the most likely suspect. I didn't want to believe it. However, Aunt Natsu and the rest were in the same difficult situation, but we couldn't help suspecting her as well. So I didn't say anything to stop Aunt Natsu from trying to pressively chase him out of the room. We had stopped her from shooting, but we were passively agreeing to chase the others out of the room. On top of that, Mario spoke in the fretful Kumasawa.
大丈夫だよ。ベアトリーチェは敬う人には優しいから。熊沢さんはベアトリーチェがいるって信じてるもん。だからきっと大丈夫だよ。マリアは客間でテレビを見るよ。一緒に見ようよ。ここテレビがなくてつまんないもん。
It looked like Kumasawa found Mario's roguish laugh very frightening. However, the three people had agreed to leave this room. Kumasawa couldn't fight the flow and had to agree, crying as she went.
それでは夏日さん、今夜はこれで。また明日お会いしましょう。
今夜だけは分かってください。警察が来たら全員に今夜のこの無礼を必ず謝罪しますから。チェスもよろしいでしょうか。できたら安全なところに。現地頼みます。
かしこまりました。
仕方ありませんね。子連れの熊が一番恐ろしいと言いますから。
源氏も熊沢も本当に申し訳ありません。また明日お会いしましょう。マリアちゃんも冷たいおばさんをどうか か許して。
マリアは許す。
奥様、この部屋の鍵です。2本すべてをお預けします。
Genji pulled two golden keys from his pocket and handed them to Aunt Natsui.
それから私が持っているお屋敷内の鍵束もお預けいたします。
He took out a bundle of about 10 keys of various shapes and handed them over. To the servants, those keys were probably proof of their position. Being placed in charge of those keys meant they were trusted and relied upon. When they were forced to return them, it meant they had lost that trust. Thinking about it this way, to Genji, who had worked here since the span of many years, there could be no greater shame. However, Genji's usual indifferent expression remained on his face.
源氏、私はお前をお父様がお亡くなりになったら長年の苦労をねぎらって退職を許すつもりでいました。なのにこのような仕打ちを私は心より恥じます。
私は親方様より今日までの日々はそれに対するご恩返しの日々であっただけです。どうかお気に病まれませんよ。
それでは参りますかな、皆さん。おやすみなさい。
おやすみ。バトラもおやすみ。
あ、マリア、ちょっと待て。
Knowledge of guilt made me call Maria back. I groped round my pocket and took out that scorpion keychain.
これ魔除けなんだろ。身につけとけ。
バトラ、確か落としてなくしたって。
あん時はなんか尺になってなくしたとかほら吹いただけだ。お前の大切なお守りをなくすわけねえだろ。
Maria silently took the charm. I was unable to say anything after that.
それでは皆様、おやすみなさいませ。
We watched them leave, our expressions completely worn out, and we weren't able to respond. Until the door closed and we heard the auto-lock, we were unable to breathe. Then we were finally allowed to breathe. After that, I noticed that Beatrice's letter, which I had been gripping the whole time, was soaked with my sweat, actually had 2 sheets. The paper was tightly tucked together, so I'd mistakenly thought it was the only one. There was no characteristics on the second sheet. The thing drawn there was a magic circle written with a red ink-like thing. Just how every magic circle until now had been different, this magic circle I had never laid eyes upon. Inside the circle, a small triangle, a large triangle and a small triangle were fit together in a simple design. But just before that, the thing written in Hebrew, and it seemed clear that it had held some kind of meaning. I wanted to know what it could mean, but we had just chased Maria, the only person who could understand the meaning of the magic circles, out of this room. I thought this magic circle was Beatrice's second message. What does the magic circle mean? Damn it. After chasing out all the suspicious people, all I could do was stay barricaded here until morning, and everything would probably be over. Once the typhoon has passed, when the seagulls cry, will everything be resolved? But the letter, which had unexplicably appeared in this room, forced us to reject that naivety. It had just been very clear, if time ran out, it would have been the witch's victory. When time runs out, is the witch planning to take on the offensive? This time, is she planning to display some fearful magic power? Maybe something that could have been used to kill 6 adults at once. Wait, when is the time supposed to run out anyway? I don't know anything.
これでもう安全です。もう絶対に。
Even as she said that, Aunt Natsui couldn't stop gripping that rifle. There was no release to in the tension in her expression. Of course, none of us felt like breathing a sigh of relief. At least not until he could hear the cry of the seagulls once more. "30 minutes remain."